Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fort Detrick Business Development Office webinar series. I am your host, Gloria Larkin, President of Target Gov. Before we get started, we have a few webinar notes that we'd like to review with you. This is a live webinar. We will mute the attendee noises so that background sounds will be kept to a minimum. Nick, can you do that with Christine, please? However, if you need to take another call when you're on the line, just hang up on this line and call back in. You will be allowed back in. We don't want you to put your phone on hold, and the reason is your on-hold message may be heard by others, and that can be very distracting. And due to the number of attendees today during this live session, we are going to ask you to send your questions in by email. While we do have a live chat available, we are also recording today's session, and we want to make the possibility of answering questions either during the live session or as a recording at any time. We want to make it possible to answer your questions. So you can always send your questions in by email, whether it's live today or as a recording 24/7. Now jot this down. It is a simple email address. It is ask, which is ASK, at FDBDO.com. I'll say that again. And the acronym is for Fort Detrick Business Development Office, so you know where that is coming from. It is ask, ASK, at FDBDO.com. You can ask your questions at any time through today's live session or later on if you're listening to it as a recording. If you are on a cell phone and you lose the connection, don't worry, just call back and you will be readmitted. And if you put your call on speakerphone so that you have your hands free for taking notes, please mute the line so that we do not hear your office background noises. And if you have any problems at all while you're on the line, please call the Fort Detrick Business Development Office number at 301-620-7071. And you will receive an email after the webinar asking you for your feedback. If you could please take a few minutes to reply, tell us what you think. We would appreciate it. And again, please know that we are recording the webinar to make it available to you for future access 24/7 at your convenience. This next hour is going to be full of great information, so let's go ahead and get started with today's webinar, the fundamentals of capture management in the government market. I'd like to introduce our two subject matter experts. They bring a great deal of information to this entire series. First, we have Jay Haro, who is Director of Strategy and Client Development with Client Solutions Architects, or CSA. As Director of Strategy and Client Development, Mr. Haro brings over 24 years of professional experience in management consulting, systems integration, and operational improvement. He's worked for major prime contractors such as EDS, Teleconsultants, and Palladium Group. And his background in the public and private sector means he brings a great deal of experience to today's session. And Mr. Joel Judy is the Commercial Contracts Manager for Client Solutions Architects. As this position of Commercial Contracts Manager for CSA, he brings over 10 years of professional experience, including 6 years as a DAWIA Level 3 certified federal contracts specialist. He brings an incredible amount of information and experience after awarding over 100 contracts and delivery orders during his 5 years at the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, including a competitive award of over $62.5 million in engineering services contracts. And he negotiated a sole source $40 million contract for their high-frequency radio group. So needless to say, Joel and Jay have a great deal of information to share with us. So I will turn over today's session to you directly. Thank you both for being here.
Very good. Thank you very much, Gloria. Hello, everyone. This is Jay Hero from CSA. And Joel, why don't you say hello to the folks so they can get used to our different voices?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar.
Very good. Yes, thanks, everyone. And why don't we jump right into it here? So we've got an agenda here on the screen that hopefully you can all see. Part one today is really going to focus on the things that you need to do in the federal government market space to sell. And so there's some fundamentals that we're going to cover in terms of things that you have to have in place that will really add to your effectiveness. And then we're going to talk to a couple of stages here in terms of a normal sales process and some of the selling activities that go on, as well as, and maybe a little bit different in terms of this conference, is how contracts plays a very, very important role in your sales cycle. So that's why you have Joel and myself here today. We'll then talk about some of the enabling technologies that'll help you sell, as well as be compliant with some of the rules that are very important in the government space, and then give you our sales perspectives and contract perspectives. In stage 2, which is in August, that's part 2, we'll really get into proposal development and writing a compliant proposal, negotiation and startup activities, and then how this is a continuous improvement. So today, I'd like you to think of this webinar as some of the upfront stuff and some of the things that you need to do to begin identifying opportunities to go capture. So Joel, why don't we hit on into the next slide? Oh, we jumped to the end here. There we go. Coming back. You're going back and forth. Here we go, folks. All right. So getting ready to step up to the plate. These are the 6 things that we think are very important in terms of your ability to sell to the federal government. We're going to dive deeply into every one of these in the next few slides, but real quickly, it starts at the top. You've got to have a very good understanding of what you're selling. In the federal government marketplace, whether you're a product provider or a systems integrator or consulting or support contractor, there's certainly a lot of firms providing services to the government. So it's very important to differentiate. It then follows into who you're going to sell to, the skills that you as a business have, what organizations, departments, agencies would really be the right spot for your type of expertise. Third is you've got to have a budget. As you all know, selling to the federal government has a long sales cycle. Opportunities can be identified, and then to when they're finally closed and awarded, that sales cycle can be anywhere from 6, 12, to even 18 months long. So it's important to know what your budget is to support that. Conversely, you also need measuring progress in terms of your performance metrics. Again, kind of goes to the same point, that because the sales cycle is long, you need to know if you're making progress. The 5th point is on marketing value, is how are you going to get your message out and your brand recognized in a very crowded marketplace, for that matter. And 6th, and probably most important one, is all those good activities can mean there are a lot of great sales activities, but as Joel's going to describe to you all today, if you're not compliant and ready to sell and ready to abide by the rules and the regulations of the federal government, then really all those other 5 steps are going to be for naught and for in vain, because you won't be in a position to actually be awarded a contract. So we're going to kind of trouble all these 6 bases here in terms of being ready to sell. So Joel, let's go to that next slide. All right. So what are you selling? A couple key points here. I would suggest you all take some time to either, if you're new to the market or if you're in the market and maybe want to take a step back and see how things are going, is really differentiate and define what your products and capabilities and services are. You really want to be very specific on your value proposition and what your differentiators are. As I mentioned, there's a lot of firms out there doing work for the federal government today. And because of the certain ways that the federal government buys, it tends to try and commoditize products and services as much as it can. So it's important that you identify as your company what makes you different and what makes your services or your products better and the right solution for that particular client. You also want to know what your competition is doing. How do you compare to that competition? That might be in terms of your products, your services, or even your pricing, and including your pricing, rather. But the last bullet's probably the most important, is you really want to be zeroing in on the client problems that you help solve. Our government employees and our government organizations are very busy today, faced with a lot of difficult decisions with budgets and so forth. So they're really focused on their world, and they look to the contractor community for help. So you've really got to be focused on their problems and how you help them produce some better results. The second item is who you're selling to. So once you understand your differentiators, your value proposition, and what your services are, well, certainly not every government agency may be a market for you. As an example, here at CSA, our expertise tends to be in a lot of the supply chain management area. There really isn't much opportunity for us in, say, a place like Center for Medicare or Medicaid Services. That's more of a processing type of an organization. So we have to be very specific in terms of what organizations meet the characteristics that would be interested in the expertise that we have. So you really want to make sure that you understand who are the specific agencies and departments you're going to go after. Secondly is roles and responsibilities in terms of the key leaders. Within your organization, there may be a dedicated business development activity. There may be technical delivery people, program managers that have to sell. But it's very important to understand who is selling what to which clients and make sure that those responsibilities are well defined. It may be business development people, sales executives, capture managers, or operational. But have a good understanding of who is responsible for what. I can tell you from experience that customers in the government really do not like to have one salesperson from a company walking in the door and then 5 minutes later another salesperson from the same company walking in the door to talk about a different product. They usually do want one single face to the client. So have a good understanding of who's doing what. Let's go to the next one, Joel.
Before you get started, if I may enter, I meant to tell everyone what we're doing today is Joel and Jay are going to go through most of the information that they have on the slides first, and then what we'd like to do is open this up to conversation and questions at the end of their presentation. You do have the ability to type in, for those who are listening live today, you can type in your questions in the chat area that you see on your screen, or send your questions into the email that we had mentioned earlier. So as you're thinking of questions during this presentation that you're hearing from Joel and Jay, just go ahead and type them into the chat, send them in by email, or you can ask them live at the end. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Gloria. All right, so now we've talked about what you're selling, who you're going to sell it to, and now we need to kind of focus in on what's the sales budget. I mentioned earlier that it's very expensive, can be a long sales cycle, so it's important to understand how you're going to capture your costs. So make sure you have a good development budget for your labor, any travel and marketing dollars that you may have to expend. And then for compliance and audit, it's often important to capture your true bid and proposal costs for proposals, so you may want to set some budget around that. There also may be some costs associated with compliance and audit, and Joel will talk a little bit to that in terms of maybe some registrations or some certifications, or perhaps if you're going after certain types of contracts, you may need a certain type of cost accounting system. So just make sure that as you're looking at your sales budget and your sales opportunities, that you look at the investment that may be required. Next area deals with performance metrics. It's very important to understand how your sales pipeline is performing. A very easy measure, and probably the most common, is how many deals do we have in the pipeline on our spreadsheet, and what's our win rate. Those are probably the two most commonly used metrics. But we would suggest you kind of expand that a little bit and look at the age of it. Our opportunities just sort of laying in the pipeline and not moving. We'll talk about different stages coming up here, but you can kind of quantify them by their stage. Are we disengaging from opportunities quick enough? Sometimes opportunities just aren't the right ones for an organization. It's important to make those decisions very quickly. So come up with measures that make sense for your organization, that you're able to see what your progress is. Let's go to the next one, Joel. All right, marketing communications. This is what this subject item here is about. As we suggest before you start selling, kind of get a good sense of how you're going to communicate to the market. I mentioned earlier there's a lot of companies, certainly here in the Washington, D.C. area, around the country, around government installations. So it's important to understand how you're going to stand out and make your brand recognizable to the government agencies that are potentially looking for you. In terms of collateral and brochure, we would definitely recommend that you spend a lot of time to make sure that your website confirms your value proposition, your services, your differentiators, what you're about, any vehicles, contract vehicles you have. perhaps any socioeconomic status. You might be veteran-owned or 8A. But keep that website particular to your government clients and who you're marketing to, and make sure it's relevant and current. If you haven't updated it with a press release in some time, think about putting something out there. That way, this is the message that you're communicating to your potential clients. As most of you know, the web has enabled government purchasing departments to do a lot of market research without having to interact with the firms themselves. So you might find that your website is becoming an entry point, if you will, for potential market surveys and governments to find out about you. Last point I would mention is LinkedIn. It has been, I think, referred to as the professional's Facebook, and the social media strategy for your company around LinkedIn, I think, is very important. Typically what you'll find, or at least we're experiencing, as you may meet some government clients or if before a meeting, they may actually check out your bio on LinkedIn just to get a little background on you. So your professional bio, as well as your company's presence on LinkedIn, is very important because it's becoming more of a marketing communications tool. Let's go to the next one, Joel. All right, so I've kind of laid out here some of the marketing and sales items that are very important to get it set up. But as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of that will be in vain if, in fact, you're not ready or not qualified to bid on some of these federal contracts. So Joel's going to walk through some of the very important contract management practices that are important.
Thanks, Jay, and I completely agree with you. It says, as Jay says, sales, of course, and having proper sales strategies is extremely important, of course. But your firm can offer the best product in the world, can offer the best services from a very dedicated and talented staff in the world. But as a contracts manager, I'm biased, but where the rubber really meets the road is being able to effectively have your contracts management practices down, being able to successfully submit a strong proposal, being able to win the contract, and then being able to effectively administer the contract. All your products and services are for naught unless you can get those practices and really focus on having really strong contracts management methodologies in order. So there's a few things that you want to consider. First and foremost, and this is at the earliest stage, is your company registered in the relevant government databases? As Jay was talking about, social media sites, and as much as Internet is more and more impacting our industry, it's really important to be registered in these databases. And of course, this is all done electronically now. First and foremost is a central contractor registration, the CCR. Very important to just register your business in that. You have to be registered in order to do any kind of business with the government. And as a contracting officer, it's the first step that they take and the first place that the contracting officer looks when they receive proposals to make sure that your company is validly registered and to make sure that you're not suspended or disbarred and that you're active. Also was the North American Industry Classification System, the NAICS, and that's important because you supply the codes for the relevant type of work that your company does, and it's important to register for multiple codes and for new ones. You don't need to be confined strictly under one code because that determines what kind of eligibility you may have to submit a proposal for a contract, and you can indeed be registered under several different NAICS codes, and so I encourage you to do so. They're written pretty broadly, so you should be able to qualify under any number of them, and again, that just opens up opportunities for you to bid on a variety of different proposed solicitations whereby you submit the proposals. Also is the Online Representations and Certifications, ORCA. That's essentially similar to Section K of an RFP, if you're familiar with that. You're basically just certifying basic information about your company, such as providing your taxpayer ID, providing any small business certifications, if indeed you are a small business, that you provide a drug-free workplace, etc. It's important to register your company, and you have to, under ORCA, so that you're eligible, again, to bid on a variety of solicitations. Also, you want to maybe take a look at registering under the Small Business Administration or the Veterans Affairs website if you're a veteran-owned business. That's important because, again, it opens up opportunities for your company if you qualify as a small business, and you will be able to compete for specific set-asides for various classifications within those systems, and that, again, will expand your company. And real quickly, you also want to take a look at whether you have an approved government cost accounting system. I want to point out that if you're a small business, it doesn't apply. If it's a contract for commercial items, it doesn't apply. If it's a firm fixed price contract, it doesn't apply. basically it's only for cost reimbursement contracts, less than $650,000 or cumulatively for $7.5 million for other cost contracts that your company may have. It's important to have those items in order, though, and the remaining bullets basically are other issues that you may want to have, that you'll need to have set up. You want to make sure that you have proper segregation of direct costs from indirect costs. Direct costs, of course, is directly the services or supplies that you're providing. Indirect costs being like overhead, G&A, fringe. You need to have those broken out to have your invoice accepted by the government so you get paid. Also want to have, at least an interim determination of cost charged to each contract. If you're a small business, you could submit an invoice to the government twice a month. If you're a large business, you can only do it once a month. Again, all goes back to being paid, especially if you're a small business. Of course, that's what you live and die by. I also want to identify costs by the contract line item. If it's required by each contract, you certainly want to do that so that it's easy to track what items you're requesting reimbursement from the government so that you get paid promptly. Then you also want to have a timekeeping system that will identify what specific taskings your employees are on. That's also required by law. And on the next slide, the third and final point is you just want to make sure, again, like we said, you have a close coordination with the marketing team. You want to be able to communicate very clearly and directly with your sales team so that you can identify opportunities. And you want to make sure that you're overall in line with the corporate development goals that you have, so that you want to make sure that you're meeting your overall strategy and vision of the company in the pursuit of these various kinds of opportunities. And so those are the initial considerations that you're going to want to have, at least contractually. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jay to discuss the sales life cycle and the various stages there.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit here, folks. So I think in this first part we've covered is just, think of those 6 items as you've gotten those foundational components in place now and you're ready to go sell. So let's kind of look at things. What we're going to do now is look at things in terms of opportunities and the various stages that opportunities tend to proceed through in the government space. And this may look familiar, and I don't think there's anything unique here in terms of the stages. They can look different terms and so forth. But generally speaking, opportunities tend to go through 6 stages. Stage 1 being you're kind of looking at a definition of a market. We want to sell at Fort Detrick, MRMC, the Medical Research and Materiel Command, as an example. Then we want to go to stage 2, where we're going to start prospecting and generating leads, and that's where you're looking at, what type of RFPs might be coming out of MRMC, as an example. Stage 3 is when you're starting to zero in on a specific set of RFPs or a specific opportunity, if you will, and starting to learn about that opportunity and that client's goals and what they're trying to do. Stage 4 is when you actually have an RFP and you're writing a proposal and you have to put your solution together and all your compliance and your pricing and so forth. Stage 5, you've submitted it, and now it's time to negotiate, perhaps answer some questions, price revisions, etc. And you start thinking about startup, that when we win this, what are the steps we need to do to deliver on what we said we were going to do. And then stage 6 is your award and execute. These 6 stages are really all designed to work together to help you get a very good understanding of who the client is, what they're trying to accomplish, what's their language, how did they make a decision, and what are the contractual mechanics they're going to use to select a vendor and actually engage with you. So each stage kind of builds upon each other. So let's go to the next one, Joel. We'll talk about stage 1. Stage 1 is really where you're starting to research and identify, again, those target agencies that you think are right for your services and products. And you start to look inside your own organization, perhaps for people that work for you that have relationships or agency knowledge. Perhaps they were a contractor in that organization, or perhaps even they worked for that organization. You get a business development person assigned for that account or those set of accounts, and you start working at it. And what we're suggesting here is in this stage 1 is really where you start to develop what we in CSA call an account growth plan. And this is really nothing more than a PowerPoint deck that really starts to capture a lot of the information about the client, their mission, their vision, their structure, what they're trying to do, major initiatives they may have, what they're good at in terms of things that they have had success on, and what they struggle with, the failures. Perhaps they've done different projects and haven't succeeded on. Because it's often in those areas that they've failed, those are the opportunities for you in the contractor community where they need help. You look at relationship issues, the owners, the budget issues they may have, who are the competitors working in there, and the key issues that they do have. How do we stand up as a company? Are we able to help in those issues? And then you really start putting your call plan together in terms of how you're going to interact with this agency, any teaming partners you may have, and what's a marketing program, or any conferences or any publications that we need to be part of such that they begin to understand who our company is. So that's stage one. Let's go on to the next slide here. Stage 1 also has a lot of contracting activities that are important. So, Joel, why don't you hit some of these items?
Sure. Thanks, Jay. So basically, the first question that the overarching question you want to ask yourself is, do you know the agency's contracting procedures? And I'll tell you now, their contracts overarchingly is a uniform set of processes across the federal workspace. However, each individual agency, has their own issues, has their own procedures, has their own regulations that they follow. So it's important to know for the specific agency which ones are applicable to that particular agency. So first of all, do you know the relevant acquisition regulations for that agency? For example, the majority of my experiences under Department of Navy, that's all dictated by the Federal Acquisition Regulation and the DFAR, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. If you're dealing with the Veterans Administration, though, for example, that's dictated by the VAR, the Veteran Administration's Acquisition Regulation. Again, very similar to the FAR, but there are key differences that you're going to want to know. Also, you want to subscribe to pre-RFPs on the e-commerce sites that your team may bid upon. And that's a great source of intelligence. If you're sales guys, you rely on them to provide information, but you're hearing it directly from the horse's mouth by subscribing to those websites to hear about upcoming opportunities or for the government to provide clarification on those opportunities. And finally, like I said, there are hot issues that each agency has, so you want to know those and make sure that you avoid those and don't call specific attention to yourself. If there may be an issue, you can open a dialogue as early as possible with the agency to make sure you don't run afoul of them. And a couple examples are the prevalence of OCIs, organizational conflicts of interest, or protests at contract award by companies who don't win a contract, who believe the government messed up at source selection, basically. Those are some of the more relevant ones in the commands that I've worked. Or also, maybe after contract award, the command has trouble processing contract modifications, which of course has a big impact upon when you can ultimately get paid or when some change needs to be made to the contract, which if it doesn't get done quickly could adversely affect your company. Of course, doing federal contracting work is all about the relationships that you have with the clients. Common mistake I see a lot of companies make is they build relationships with the program managers and the technical people. That's certainly important, and they're the ones that the companies tend to work closely with on a daily basis. However, it's really in your company's best interest to know your contracting officer. Again, my mantra, contracts is where the rubber meets the road in terms of your company delivering a superior product and the government accepting it and you getting paid. And so you're going to want to have a good rapport with the contracting officer so that if there is an issue, you could pick up the phone and get it resolved. And having some kind of existing relationship with the contracting officer really is a big help. And so I would suggest that you take a look at those issues, at least from a contracts management standpoint, for the first stage of defining your markets. I'll turn it back to Jay to discuss the second step.
Very good. Okay, so stage 2, what we've basically said now is we're trying to get into a prospecting and a generation lead stage. And in this stage, what you've done is, in stage 1, you said, I think we need to go sell our services, if you will, and I'll keep going back to Fort Detrick at perhaps the National Cancer Institute, or maybe Homeland Security, or maybe MRMC, again, the Army Medical Command up there. So now you're starting to zoom in on Army Medical Command, and you really want to start applying your account plan. So where you've learned all that information about who the prospective organization is, what they're doing, what their issues are, you're really starting to apply that. And as a result of applying that, something's going to start popping out, meaning there's going to be a list of specific opportunities, RFPs that are either pre-RFPs or announced solicitations, or even an RFI, request for information, or even conversations with customers saying, we think we're going to need to do these things, but you're going to start to begin to get specific opportunities that you know are going to come out. And for those, we'd suggest that you begin to develop what we call capture decks, okay? And this is, again, where you're collecting all the critical information to help you qualify that opportunity, to see if you are in a good competitive position to win it, what your solution may look like, what your value proposition may look like, what your teaming mates need to look like and needs are. And all that information starts to get collected in one source that you can manage the progress of the pursuit as you're going forward. You want to do this as early as possible and start this as early as possible, because if you're starting to do this, once the RFP comes out, then it's generally too late and you have a lot of catch-up work to do. Stage 2 also has a pretty important component, if you will, with contracting, because as I mentioned earlier, we're looking now at fairly specific opportunities. So, Joel, what is it we should be looking for in contracting in this stage?
Specifically related to contracting, what you want to do is, again, kind of like I talked about when we first started, was, it's all about compliance. So make sure that your contracts are all in compliance and that any organizational conflict of issues that you have for specific opportunities don't exist. It goes back to, are you validly registered in the CCR and under the applicable NAICS codes to expand the opportunities that you have as much as possible to bid on these various RFPs? Are you registered under the relevant as many small business administration categories as possible? And by that I mean, woman-owned small business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business, hub zone, 8A certified, etc. And under the Veterans Administration, again, if you're veteran-owned, do you have a certified veteran? Are you a certified veteran enterprise? Again, there are specific set-asides that the SBA and the VA do where only specific companies that are qualified with those particular qualifications can bid on them. So it reduces the pool of competition and greatly increases your chances of winning a contract. So those are definitely things that you want to make sure you have in order before the RFP hits the street, so that once it does, you can focus on putting together a really good proposal. Also, begin examining your teaming options and agreements with a potential team of subcontractors if you're going to prime on the particular contract. You basically want to get signed non-disclosure agreements and teaming agreements with other companies. There's nothing incredibly difficult about those. They're certainly not rocket science, but they take a heck of a lot of time sometimes to send out to the companies. Inevitably, some companies will lose track of them. Some will want changes to be made to the clauses, so you have to go back and forth. Again, not hard, but it takes a lot of time. I can speak from personal experience on that. And again, not anything you really want to deal with once the RFP hits the street, because once that happens, you want to be able to focus your time on putting together a really strong proposal. So make sure you get those things done ahead of time as early as possible, and you'll be in a better position to work on that great proposal. Back to you, Jay.